My first question to you has to be, what is ACLU doing currently in terms of COVID relief? Because we had spoken about those efforts that you were making a
Yeah,
couple of months ago. And also, I would love to know the ACLU reaction to the election results.
sure. Well, let's start with the election results first. The ACLU is a nonpartisan organization. We don't take sides in an election. We don't endorse or oppose any candidates. But what we do talk about are issues. And when there is an administration that has shown clear disdain for the rights of all sorts of marginalized groups, including immigrants, including women, including LGBTQ folks, it's really important to make sure that we hold that administration accountable. But when that administration leaves office, we know that there have been problems in Democratic administrations just as much as there have been problems in Republican administrations in our history. We have sued Trump as more times than any other president in our history, but we sued Obama quite a bit too, especially around immigrants' rights and national security. And we anticipate that we're going to continue to do that work under a Biden administration. And the work is far from over. The work that we have to do to clean up the destruction of the Trump administration is really daunting. We need to make sure that we are looking at our immigration systems. We need to make sure that we are building up the infrastructure of our civil rights that have been gutted by the Trump administration. And we know that it's not going to be easy. So we're looking forward to a new chapter in American history for sure. But I do think that the work of the ACLU is going to continue to remain important.
What are some of your expectations from this incoming administration? They are coming very strong. I think immigration is a huge issue for them as well, immigrant rights, just rights in general. What do you expect?
Well, I expect that there's going to be, first of all, a change in tone, which is really important, right? Like we know that the Trump administration started with a tone of hostility and fear and creating division amongst all sorts of groups within the United States. But with this administration, with the Biden administration, we hope that there's going to be more of a tone of unity in the United States, and that's really important. In terms of immigrants' rights, I hope that the Biden administration undoes the chaos that was inserted into the immigration system by the Trump administration. But we have to keep in mind that under the Obama administration, where Biden was vice president, we saw more deportations than any other president in the history of the United States. And so if that's the legacy that Biden hopes to carry forward, that's a problem. And that's something that we need to address. And in terms of criminal justice, look, there's been news recently about how they want to make people who are incarcerated or former prisoners eligible for Pell Grants from the United States so that they can continue their education. Biden was one of the crafters of the policy that led to the removal of Pell Grants from people who were incarcerated or have criminal history. So there's a lot of cleanup work to do. I understand that people can grow and they can change their policies and make better decisions about things as they advance in their careers. And I'm hopeful for that. But I think there's a lot of work to be done. And, Biden certainly has the power to end the death penalty in the United States at the federal level, and that's something else that we're going to be looking out for. Right now, we saw in the last several weeks that Trump has been trying to speed up executions of people, especially even those who have real problems in their convictions, people whose convictions aren't sound. Yet we executed several people, and I think that's a real problem and something that Biden can cure, and that's something that's going to be part of the work that we do as the ACLU.
Just talking about incarceration, because ACLU has been a huge advocate for getting people out of the prisons, because they basically feel that their rights were not, looked at all when they were put into prison. They didn't have a lawyer, maybe they didn't have the money to, be bailed out. There are many reasons for it. But why are you advocating so much for them in the last couple of months is my question.
Yeah. That ties into our COVID-related work. Right now, we had to decide as the ACLU, where can we have the biggest impact, and who are the folks that will need us the most. And there was a lot of attention being given to a lot of people in this during the pandemic. However, there was very little attention going towards the people that were incarcerated. We talk about in New Jersey, we've seen the governor take steps, right? Like he's taken steps to protect us all, including limiting the size of indoor gatherings, right? Making sure that we can't. He's limited the size of outdoor gatherings as well. Closing stores and retail establishments. There are all these signs on retail establishments. No more than 5 people allowed at a time, et cetera. And in New York, you're doing the same thing with the governor and the mayor saying that we're no longer going to have indoor dining and all of that. But in prisons, where prisons are a long-term indoor gathering that lasts for decades for people. And they weren't met with social distancing in mind. They were meant to hoard people in tight quarters for as long as possible. And so we thought that, prisons, first of all, in good times, prisons can be, petri dishes for the spread of disease. Right. But obviously during the midst of a global pandemic, the chances of things spreading are far higher. And we saw that play out in New Jersey, where we had more deaths in New Jersey prisons than any other prisons, most other prisons in the country. And we saw a higher rate of death in New Jersey prisons than any other prison in the country. And that was a real problem. So we decided that we needed to take steps to figure out what to do here. And that included, of course, giving people who are incarcerated and people who work in prisons the proper protective equipment so that they can protect themselves. But beyond that, we were talking to health experts and criminal justice experts. Ultimately, people said, prisons themselves are the problem, right? The fact that we're keeping people in tight quarters the way we are, the only way to resolve this is to reduce the population in prisons. Like if you're going to listen to CDC guidelines and listen to scientists about this, the science says that you can't have people in tight quarters together, and prisons, only perpetuate that harm. So the best thing that you can do is release people from prison so that the people who are released can properly self-isolate, and then the people who are left behind have better chances of social distancing, so that they can, hopefully prevent themselves from getting the virus. So we were able to introduce and pass a bill through the New Jersey legislature and get it signed by the governor. That it was ultimately signed in October, and in November, on November 4th, we saw over 2,100 people being released from New Jersey prisons. And over the course of the following months, we'll see hopefully another 1,000 people released from prison. So by the end of the year, hopefully maybe early 2021, we'll have seen almost close to a 33 to 35% reduction in our prison population since March 2020. And that's, huge. That's not unlike what any other state has been able to do. New Jersey has taken a step that is incredibly progressive. It addresses it helps address the public health crisis of the pandemic, but it also helps address the public health crisis of mass incarceration. Right.
Are brown and black communities disproportionately impacted in these prisons? We saw, especially with COVID, we saw that impact, on the black and brown communities a lot more. They have a higher chance of getting COVID as well. It's been stated in many, studies. How have you looked at it? Are the rates of incarceration higher in minorities and the communities of color?
Yes, we look at everything through a racial justice lens. We knew that when COVID hit, that it would be a racial justice issue. As you pointed out, Black and brown folks have been bearing the brunt of the economic burdens and the healthcare burdens and the criminal justice consequences around COVID. And now, obviously, that trickles into prisons as well, where we see higher rates of Black and brown folks incarcerated than white folks. And in New Jersey in particular, New Jersey has the terrible distinction of being worse in terms of its racial disparities in its prisons. So you're 12 times more likely to be incarcerated if you're Black than if you're white. And that's really, really bad. And we knew that, you know, if COVID hit the prisons as it did, that Black folks would bear the burden because of what we know about who's incarcerated in New Jersey. And that's, you know, a result of years of institutional racism, years of systemic racism, 4 centuries of oppression of Black communities, and really just, you know, the criminal justice system from start to finish is rife with this systemic racism, including in policing and in prosecution and in the way we issue sentences by judges, and of course in the prison system itself.
You know, when we're talking about the prison system and we're talking about like reforms, especially what is needed to truly, like, you know, solve this huge issue of incarceration and also the impact on the brown and Black communities. So Attorney General Grewal has come out with this huge, ambitious police reform bill. And I know the ACLU New Jersey is supporting it. I would like to know why and what are the key factors that are truly important in that reform that we should know about?
So the Attorney General came out with a police directive, which governs the way force is used in interactions between law enforcement and the community. And this use of force directive is essentially it's actually very good. It takes steps to ensure, from a broad framework perspective, that that we value human life. I know that's easy to say, but so often we see police interactions go so badly in which people end up hurt or dead, and this takes steps to reframe the narrative. And what it does is it says, you know, regardless of who you're encountering as a police officer, if you're encountering a victim of a crime or a witness of a crime, and yes, even a suspect of a crime, you have to treat them with the same degree of dignity and humanity. And force, physical force, should only be used as a measure of absolute last resort. There's an emphasis on de-escalating situations rather than escalating them by the use of force. So we want to use other tactics, you know, talking to people, figuring out how we can get to a solution without having to use force and potentially escalate and lose life. You know, there are things in the policy that are really good. It talks about making sure that, you know, we see what the constitutional floor is, right? Like making sure that we understand what the law allows, but then going beyond that and allowing for a better standard where New Jersey can practice a new version of constitutional policing and make sure that we are taking steps to be the best we can be in our policing. But I will say this, you know, policy on paper is one thing, right? Policy in practice is another. And we want to make sure that the directive, as good as it might be, is implemented effectively, and that every law enforcement agency in the state follows it, both in letter and in spirit. And that means that we should be seeing far less uses of force across the state. One of the good things about the Attorney General's directive is the power of the Attorney General itself. So the Office of the Attorney General in New Jersey is one of the most powerful AG offices in the country, and that's because as the top prosecutor and the top police officer or law enforcement officer in the state, the Attorney General has the power to issue binding directives to every law enforcement agency in the state. So we don't have to go, you know, municipality by municipality or county by county. The Attorney General can speak and be the final word, and have uniformity across the state on how force is to be used and when it's to be used.
And what I also found interesting about this was also the fact that police can intervene while the situation is happening. And that perhaps could have saved someone like George Floyd, this year. How are you looking at that?
I think it's very important. Police in this policy have a duty to intervene when they see, force being used by another officer that's inappropriate, and that's incredibly important. You're right. We could have saved some lives if officers had the obligation to and the ability to intervene and stop the application of force against certain individuals in our history. And yes, George Floyd comes to mind. There were 4 officers just standing around while the one officer had his knee on George Floyd's neck that ultimately killed him. And that was unacceptable then. It should have been unacceptable forever, even without a policy to explain it. But now that we have it in paper in New Jersey, hopefully we won't see incidents like that happening in our state.
Do you think it'll be truly implemented in the police system?
I think there are going to be challenges. I hope that it is, and I hope that the Attorney General and his team and and law enforcement officers all across the state take steps to implement it in the right ways. But I think there are going to be issues that arise. There are tricky situations that will arise, undoubtedly, right? Whether it's unclear whether we've reached the point of last resort where we can now use force. I think the trick is making sure that there's actual accountability on the back end. So what happens when a police officer deviates from the use of force policy? What happens when something goes wrong and the police officer, violates the use of force policy? I believe there are ways in which the Attorney General's office and the local law enforcement offices will hold their own individual officers accountable. And one of the ways is there's going to be a use of force portal where every use of force by any police officer is going to be reported to the Attorney General, and it's going to be scrutinized by the Attorney General. And at some point in 2021, we're going to see a publicly accessible portal where we will be able to see in New Jersey which law enforcement officers are using force. Hopefully we'll be able to search by name so we can find out the uses of force by any one individual officer in our state, and be able to hold them accountable that way as well.
Definitely. I think it's so important for us to have these kind of police reforms. Everybody has been asking for it, and I'm so glad that the state of New Jersey is doing it. Just talking more about the rates of incarceration, which will definitely be impacted by this new bill, and I think it will also impact Black and brown communities. I want to talk to you about legalization of cannabis. The bill has been passed in the Senate Assembly. And I know the ACLU New Jersey has been supporting it. In fact, you have been a huge advocate for it for a while now. I'd like to know what the reason behind that is. And also, it has such a bad impression on the community itself, and it's been looked down upon. How is that going to change, according to you?
So, the reason we were involved in this work from the beginning is because of racial justice, right? In New Jersey, you're 3.5 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession if you're Black than if you're white, even though we know that both Black folks and white folks use marijuana at the same rate. We're making over about 36,000 arrests for marijuana possession every single year in our state. That costs a lot of, there's a lot of opportunity costs for the individual, right? They miss out on they could go to prison. They have fines and fees. They miss out on educational opportunities. There are a whole bunch of collateral consequences if they have a conviction, including potentially losing their homes or losing their children or having immigration consequences. But then there's also the cost to the state, right? We're spending hundreds of millions of dollars every year in processing these arrests and prosecutions, for something that most people believe in the state, overwhelmingly believe in the state and in the country, should be legal. And so, those are the reasons why we at the ACLU have been advocating for marijuana legalization. It doesn't make sense to have a dozen states have it fully legalized, and then have New Jersey fall behind and leave severe consequences for people who are caught with something that would have been legal if they were in Colorado or in Washington or 10 other states in the country. And so we've been advocating for legalization. We got a bill through so the way it worked in New Jersey was that first we had a ballot question on the November 2020 ballot,
right,
where voters got to decide whether or not New Jersey could pursue legalization. When that passed, which we had an important role in, we led the campaign to encourage voters to vote yes.
Yeah.
It then fell back to the legislature to decide what implementation would look like. And so the legislature over the past several weeks and months has been working to put together a bill that would not only legalize cannabis, it would also decriminalize cannabis immediately so that we can stop the arrests immediately, even while we are waiting for the market to be up and running. So legalization will allow for an industry to be created, but that industry is going to take some months, right? It's going to take some time for stores to be able to pop up and for dispensaries to be able to distribute. But what we need to do immediately is stop the arrests as fast as possible, and hopefully we can do that sometime soon with the governor's signature on the decriminalization bill, and then subsequent to that, the legalization bill.
What happens to people that are already in the prisons for this, that have been arrested?
Yeah. So the good thing about these bills is that there's a provision in them. So if there's anybody that is facing pending charges right now as a result of a marijuana arrest, those charges will be dismissed. If there's anybody who's incarcerated right now, which I don't think in New Jersey that we have too many people that are actually incarcerated for simple marijuana possession. Usually it's something bigger than that leads to incarceration. But if there are people that are incarcerated for marijuana possession, hopefully there'll be a way out for them as a result of these bills if their charges are dropped or dismissed. But what also is encouraging is that we passed in 2019, we passed what we call a bill for expungements. There's a law out there that will be implemented very soon, hopefully in February, we've been hearing, that will allow for people who have marijuana-related criminal records dating back decades to be able to clear those records and be able to move forward for their lives, so that they no longer have to report that they have a criminal conviction if they have a marijuana possession arrest.
What's next now after the governor signs it off?
After the governor signs the bill, there is something called the Cannabis Regulatory Commission that is being constituted right now. The head of it is actually a former ACLU employee. So my colleague, her name is Diana Wenu. She's going to be the head of the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, and they are going to determine the details, right, of what the industry looks like. They're going to be the ones to determine who gets licenses to grow marijuana and sell marijuana in our state. They're going to be the ones to determine what tax revenue looks like, and where it's going to go. There's great provisions in the bill that collects tax revenue and dedicates it to social justice causes in those communities that have been hardest hit by the war on drugs. And the Cannabis Regulatory Commission is going to have a say in how that's all executed. So the details really matter. I know there was a lot of attention in the legislative fight and how that developed over the course of the past several months. But I think it's really important for media to be focused on the regulatory battles as well, because sometimes, even though it's not as compelling or not as entertaining, the details really have the day-to-day impact on people's lives, and that's going to be governed by the Regulatory Commission.
Do you think through the tax money that gets collected, that would be collected from the legalization of marijuana, do you see that impacting areas around New Jersey? Building, more infrastructure for certain communities that don't have it. Is that also a vision?
Yes, absolutely. The initial version of the bill actually didn't have revenue dedicated for those communities. Initially, it was only going to go to police, and we pushed back on that. The reason why we are in this mess to begin with is because we had way too much resources for police to target people who were accused of marijuana-related crimes. So what we're looking forward to is the newest version of the bill, which dedicates 70% of the sales tax and then imposes a cultivator fee for anybody who's cultivating, and 100% of that cultivator fee will be dedicated to what's called impact zones. And those are communities all across the state that have been hardest hit by the war on drugs. They have the highest rates of arrest for cannabis-related crimes. They have high poverty rates, low employment rates. And so it's a way to develop some economic energy in those communities for infrastructure and social services that we know can help both individuals and communities at large. So I hope it's going to have an impact. And what we know though is that the tax revenue may generate hundreds of millions of dollars a year for cannabis, but it's not going to solve all of our problems, right? That's only one piece of it. And what's going to come with this, I hope, is a culture change in law enforcement so that we don't go for easy arrests with marijuana anymore. Right. We stop arresting people altogether. We stop introducing people into the criminal legal system unnecessarily. And hopefully we'll see some shifts in the way we operate in terms of policing and in our criminal justice system, and also reinvest in communities. And make sure that the industry that we set up is equitable, so that we're not creating just another, white-run elitist industry, but there are people that look like New Jersey that are able to get licenses to be a part of the marketplace. So all of that together, hopefully, will help, fix this sliver of the criminal justice system that we've identified as a problem.
This is definitely very interesting. We're all looking forward to what happens, at the road ahead. I only have 2 questions left for you here. Yep. I'd like to know what else is on your agenda. I know legalization of cannabis is has been a huge part of what you have been campaigning for a while. What else can we look forward to in 2021?
There's a lot. There's just so much that we have our eyes on right now. First of all, we're going to continue our immigrants' rights work. There's a lot of work happening right now. We are incarcerating hundreds, if not thousands, of our neighbors simply because they are suspected of being undocumented, and that's just an injustice. There are thousands of people in New Jersey jails who are in purgatory right now. They're awaiting either deportation or to be freed, but they are suffering in inhumane conditions in Elizabeth and Hudson County and Bergen County and in Essex County. And we need to make sure that we put an end to immigration detention wholesale across the state and across the country. So we're going to be working on that. On criminal justice issues, I know we discussed the use of force policy, but there's a lot more that we need to do to make sure that policing is accountable. We're going to be advocating for civilian complaint review boards so that civilians have the ability to have oversight over policing in their communities. We're going to be advocating for an end to qualified immunity, which shields officers from accountability and legal liability, even when they commit the most egregious acts and even if they kill people. And we're going to advocate for transparency in police discipline. Right now in New Jersey, you don't have any access to how police officers are disciplined for misconduct. We don't see any internal affairs records. We don't see any disciplinary records. But meanwhile, states like New York and Florida and Georgia that aren't considered to be progressive at all have better laws on this sort of transparency. Yet New Jersey is falling behind. So we need to do better there. So there's that on the policing front. On a more broader note, one of the things that we're going to be hoping for in New Jersey is better processes in our legislature. We right now are in a situation where lawmakers vote on bills without disclosing them to the public. We see the marijuana. The marijuana bill is a perfect example of this, where lawmakers would introduce a 250-page marijuana legalization bill on late on a Friday, and expect people to be ready to testify on Monday. Meanwhile, there would be changes happening over the course of the weekend, and the final version of the bill wouldn't be available to people until after the hearing itself. So, that's just unjust. It's anti-democratic. It doesn't make any sense, and we need to fix our legislative processes. So that's going to be on our agenda as well.
Definitely. A lot of accountability here, and we look forward to how, the ACLU New Jersey works around it, because, we also believe people have to be held accountable for their actions. It was so great having you here. I just have one last question for you. I would love to know how the ACLU New Jersey would like us to help you, the viewers, or just people in general. How should we help you?
Well, thank you for that question. Look, there is so much that can be done. First of all, I would encourage everybody to go to aclu-nj.org to check out the work that we've been doing, and go to aclu.org to find the work that we've been doing on the national level. It's a remarkable organization that touches on so many issues. I would hope that Indian viewers and South Asian viewers will familiarize themselves with the work of the ACLU. One of my goals as an Indian American leading this organization is to make the organization more relevant to our communities. It's challenging. Not all of these issues that I talked about impact South Asians in the way they may impact Black Americans or Latino Americans or other communities. But that shouldn't be the measure as to whether or not we get involved, right? We should be involved if it impacts anybody. And it shouldn't only be self-interest that motivates us. So I think it's really important for our communities to get involved however we can. One way to do so is to support your local ACLU affiliate, whether you're in New Jersey or not, and that's ensuring a strong ACLU in your state will ensure better accountability, better access to government, making sure that our criminal justice system and our immigration system are a little more just and more fair, and it'll develop political power for the people, and not just the people that are elected into office that may not have the best interests of our communities in mind. So I would encourage people, especially as they round out their years, to see how they can financially support the ACLU as well.
Yeah. Definitely. I think there's an option to donate at the website, and I hope people go to it and just click on it. I think it'll be so great for them to help such a great cause. Thank you so much again for being with us on ITV Gold. We loved having you here.